righty.
I just got back from the Annecy Animation Festival where you see animation styles and crazy animation from all around the world, and I feel like you just saw everything at the Annecy Festival in this one film. Okay, now, I purposely wanted to introduce these guys separately because they're unbelievable. This is an incredibly talented group. So, let me pull out the little cheat sheet they gave me here because I was reading it earlier. Alan Hawkins, head of character animation. There's most recently created, I normally am not going to read these things, but most recently created work on Hotel Transylvania, Transformania, Mitchell's versus the Machines, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, animation supervisor, Arthur Christmas, on and on and on. Wow. Thank you. Next. This is so weird.
You don't gotta do it.
Michael Lasker. There he is at the end. Visual effects supervisor on this film, of course. He worked, of course, on Mitchell versus the Machine, the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and of course some of the other Sony films, such as Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and Hotel Transylvania. Amazing, amazing work, sir. Okay, with Justin K. Thompson. All right. Listen to this. He got an Annie Award for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Production designer on Sony Animation's Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2. He spent many years at Cartoon Network working on Powerpuff Girls, Samurai Jack, and Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Holy moly! Anyway, Justin, thank you. And we're going to get more into your situation. Who do we have next? This is amazing.
Situation.
This is insane. We are going to have questions, and you are going to ask some, so please do that. Kemp Powers. Kemp Powers. You know, I'm going to forgive. We're animation. This is a SEPA, you know. So we're going to forgive you for all the live action work you have done. Star Trek Discovery, One Night in Miami. But you co-wrote and co-directed Soul, which is the best Pixar pictures ever. And we thank you for that. And Joaquim Dos Santos. Last but not least, Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Legend of Korra, Voltron, Legendary Defender, Teen Titans, and I'm going to tell you, up until the last Spider-Man movie, my absolute favorite, no joke, animated superhero series of all, which is Justice League Unlimited, which is really one of the best superhero shows ever, until these movies came along, I think. Where do we begin? There is so much and too much that we can't begin to cover it all, but I want to know about the beginning and the origin. Obviously, the other film came out, it won all the awards, it won the Oscar, it won the Annie. When was it decided they would make a sequel, and how soon did you guys get involved with it? Because clearly they have some new people here at the lead. What was I'd like to know more about the origin of this film and how it came to be, because it wasn't planned. It couldn't have been. They made that first one with no thought of making a sequel, I assume. Who wants to talk?
I think you should go first because you started.
All right.
Yeah, so I was wrapping up on Voltron, sort of figuring out what my next moves were. I had talked to them early on when the first one was in development, and they said they were doing a Spider-Man film, and we've all seen a lot of Spider-Man content. There's a lot of it out there. And then they said they were doing a Miles film, and I was like, oh my gosh. That, I sort of was wrapped up in another thing, saw that first trailer drop. mind blown when you guys dropped that first trailer and Miles pulled off his mask, and I mean the trailer landed with such a massive thud, like across the entire animation industry. And so I get a call, like while I was still at DreamWorks, from Christine Nelson, who runs Sony Animation, cold call. I never pick up my phone when I see like a number I don't recognize. And she said, "Hey, Christine Nelson, you want to run Spider-Man too?" And I said, yeah, that'd be great. So I came in at the tail end of the first one, still wrapping, like, so there was a bit of a plan, like, they knew a sequel was coming. I don't know that there was like, you know, like the groundwork for what it was gonna be. It was literally just, you know, we're gonna make a sequel, do you wanna be a part of it? And the answer was yes. Yeah. Justin was already there, he was nice enough to invite me into like lighting meetings, so I could see, it was my first time even being involved with feature animation, so he was sort of guiding me through the process as he was still production designing the first film, and saying, "Get ready for this, buddy."
Kemp, how did you get involved?
It's funny because I actually saw the first film before it came out when they brought it to Pixar. So I was in production on Soul. At the time, I believe it was Incredibles 2 was the movie that was out. So they do this thing at Pixar where during lunch breaks we watch movies. And it was Bob Fruschetti and Peter Ramsey, and I don't know if Rodney was there, but it was a few folks from there, and they showed Into the Spider-Verse. You didn't come down for that, did you? Okay, and yeah, I mean, I just sat in that audience and was like, oh damn, that's good. You know, it was one of those things. So it's funny because at the time there were some things that we were working on in Soul, and there were some new ideas we were trying to explore. And seeing that Spider-Verse film kind of like went back to Pete, and I was like, see, I think we could do like a little bit more needle drop music. It actually helped influence some of the decisions we made in Soul. So when we wrapped up, I live in Los Angeles, I was coming back home, and they were like, well, are you interested in doing any other animated films? Because I do live action as well, I do theater. And I said, honestly, I'd be curious to meet the people at Sony because it's the Wild West over there. Yeah. That turned into a meeting with Christine Nelson, who quickly told me like that they were doing a sequel to Spider-Verse, and if I wanted to meet Chris and Phil. So that turned into a meeting with Phil Lord and Chris Miller. We really hit it off. They asked me if they were looking for another director, introduced me to Joaquin and Justin, and I was actually working on this film months before Soul came out.
Wow.
So when Soul came out, I had already been on this film for quite a while, because 2 days after I wrapped Soul production, because Soul got delayed like 6 months. So 2 days after I wrapped Soul production, I was in meetings with these guys, and we were working on this film that no one even knew we were the directors yet.
You were telling us like in meetings, I haven't slept like a day because I'm wrapping scenes on Soul, and we're in these like meetings.
In terms of self-care, by the way, these guys can attest to it. Early on, it was still COVID when we were starting on this, so we were on Zoom calls. Yeah. And I was falling asleep in Zoom calls, and Joaquin would text me. He's like, dude, you're falling asleep. Dude, you're falling asleep. And it turns out I had bad sleep apnea and didn't know. So I went to like a doctor and ended up getting treated for it. And then like a week later, everyone was like, oh my God, Kemp's awake. Like I had years of untreated sleep apnea. Middle-aged men of a certain age tend to not take care of themselves. But I learned the hard way, and it was so funny because of our early Zoom meetings where it was like, is Kemp not interested? I'm like, I'm so exhausted. So yeah.
If you have any of these problems, please consult your doctor.
Yeah. It's actually fun. They do a sleep study. You like stay at the hospital overnight and put, I'm sure people here got sleep apnea. Don't even try, whatever. You know what time it is.
Justin, I have a different question, which actually could be for all of you really, but similar. Did they early on, was there a meeting where they go, okay, you just saw this, we need to top this, because that's what you did. But did they actually say, was that the intention to, you know, not just continue it, but blow it away in a way, you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I was a production designer on the first movie, so on that movie we were, I was really concerned, and so were the directors of the original film, and we were all just very concerned with, doing something with this medium that hadn't been done before. And I started working on the sequel pretty much right away, like 2 weeks after we wrapped the first one, and I just came in and started talking to Joaquim, I just said, we're not gonna do the same thing at all. We have to do something different. And that was before we even knew people liked the first movie. Because I think as filmmakers, you rarely get opportunities anywhere in this industry to try something this bold. And the studio was so supportive the entire time we were making the first movie. And they actually, even before audiences really started reacting to the first movie, they were so excited about how it, like I remember Tom Rothman actually came, who's like in charge of, who runs all of Sony, came into a meeting one time, and it was very near the end of the project, and he came into the screening room, and we showed him about 5 minutes of finished footage, and he said, I don't know what I just saw, but you've changed everything.
Yeah.
And this is what you need to keep doing. And so we pretty much had a mandate from the beginning of the first film to not repeat ourselves. And that is so intoxicating and so rewarding and so exciting as a filmmaker that there was just no chance any of us were gonna not take the risk of trying something different. And we knew it was gonna be difficult to make something as amazing as the first movie, because it really was. But we knew we all wanted to. So the idea of like, was the spirit there from the beginning? Absolutely. And we started talking immediately, all of us, about what we were gonna, what would excite us, and the idea of like seeing every dimension have its own style was there from the get-go.
Right.
I will say, I remember watching that end sequence in one of those boxes, and I remember Phil going like, how do you think we got around that? And I was like, dude, I think it happened on screen already. I don't know what the heck we're gonna do from here. It's like, we're gonna figure it out.
How do they break it up with 3 directors? How does that work? I don't understand that, so if I don't understand it, I don't know. No, you each have a section of the film, or?
We started off together.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just it. In the beginning, it was all of us doing every meeting, because keep in mind, before we get heavy into production, we are having look dev meetings. We're having costume design meetings. Like, there's a costume designer on this film. We're looking at dozens and dozens of shirts for a character. We're doing all of these meetings together as art meetings, and we don't storyboards. Where we're doing all of it together for. I mean, these things take years, so it's quite a while. But then when we get to a point where we kind of, in order to get a film this big done, we kind of have to split up, and it turns into one of those things where we have our areas of expertise, and we kind of go into those sections, and then we check in with each other every day, and give each other notes as the material kind of gets fed through to one another. I mean, it helps that we have such different backgrounds. You saw, like, for Justin being the production designer on the first film, Joaquin's probably one of the best, in my opinion, one of the best action storyboard artists who's like ever worked, and I'm a writer, I'm an editor, and I like working with actors. So I'm sitting in edit, I'm recording the actors, where it worked out perfectly, where we didn't have a lot of overlap, but we can just confer with one another, and it helped that we trusted each other a lot. Like, there was a lot of like, whatever Justin thinks, I'm fine with. Whatever Joaquin thinks, whatever Kemp, like, we would always say that, like, I trust this person, and it came from those early years of us being in every meeting together and figuring out our taste and our style.
Yeah, because what you're doing is you're setting the foundation of the project. You want everyone's ideas, everyone coming together, and then you just build up from that, and then everyone branches off. But that period of time, I mean, it was a small team, it was a core team, and just getting everyone's ideas on the table and setting that foundation for the show is so important.
I have so many questions. I'm going to jump all around it, all different ways. Alan, head of character animation. The animation is superb in every direction, whether it's surreal or if it's realistic. I don't even know what I'm looking at. I think that's the highest compliment you can say these days, because everybody's figured out how to do everything. But I don't even know. It looks, the actual character animation of the human characters is, look, I know it looks a little bit, I don't know, do you photograph live action? How do you get it that way? It's so well done.
Well, thank you. I mean, I didn't work on the first film So coming onto the project was like really intimidating and scary. Like I had I hadn't worked on the first film, and so I had a lot to learn when I came on. It was, I mean, I saw the first film. It was, I mean, mind blowing. I was super jealous. The head of animation on the first film is one of my good friends named Josh. We went to college together. He's one of my best frenemies, and so we definitely had this like rivalry, and so there was a lot of pressure to meet what they had done and try to do more. But as far as what we're going for the look and for each performance, you know, we want these to be the most like rich, believable characters with like real personalities that we can you know, dig out of them. Like, you know, we don't want animation choices. We want like good acting choices. And so when the animators are working on scenes, they'll film reference, they play the dialogue along, and they always come in with a plan. And whenever an animator shoots reference, we always would encourage them, do what you think it should be, but then also do some surprising takes. Do something you don't expect it to be, do something you think it shouldn't be. And oftentimes there were gems in those little like, here's a different way of thinking about it. And so, you know, when you go in with a plan, you're kind of automatically going to something that's assumed. But if you improvise or almost play against that, that's when the real surprises would come out that have like real character depth to them. And so that's what we were always searching for, is like, how can this scene make sense and resonate, but also surprise the other people?
It's funny because one thing that I remember, one of the daily reviews, it was the kid licking the window on the subway. And that take was like, well, that was just a goofy take. And we were like, no, that's the one. Let's just have the kid licking the...
We have that video. I mean, you can get the animator doing that.
Yeah.
He went for it.
Yeah, I think that's the crazy thing is, we literally walk into a room and it looks like the Brady Bunch squares, and it's all these different takes running the performance, and it's the animators in their respective cubes or offices running through the scene.
You can watch a whole version of the film, just that.
Yeah, sometimes we would actually shoot whole sequences. Like I had a handful of really, really great, they were roommates, there were 3 of them, and they were all working together on the film. And they did entire sequences with camera cuts and everything. And sometimes we were like, yeah, just make that. Like it was.
Yeah, the barbecue, right? There was I remember seeing a full live action version of Miles walking through the barbecue where one animator did all the parts of all the guests. So he's like walking through all these versions of himself, and we're just going like, wow, this is too much. So,
You know, I don't talk a lot when we do these about the voices that much, because we're talking about the craft of animation here, but I have to say the acting is unbelievable in this film. I can't even imagine how many times people had to come in to record or how any of that works. The acting is just so good in this. Please talk about that for a moment.
yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I was super, I mean, look, they already had an amazing cast for the first film. All of them came back. And then, you know, we were all, again, when you talked about early on, we were all a big part of that casting process of, you know, looking at the characters, particularly the new characters, and we had some pretty vigorous debates about the best people to select. But in the cases of a lot of these characters, I mean, for the most part, we were attracted to these voice actors, their natural speaking voices. Great example of that is Daniel Kaluuya, who's Spider-Plum. Most of the audio reference you hear is him doing an American accent. For us, we were just listening to him doing interviews. And we're like, oh man, this guy doing interviews is insane. But then when you get in the booth with a lot of these people, there's some people who have a lot of experience doing VO work, but we have a lot of people who are novices. Shea Wiggum, he played George Stacy. He'd never done voiceover in his life. So that was really satisfying because it was so unusual for him to be doing a scene with no scene partner.
Yeah.
And there were lots and lots of questions. He had questions about the character. That's also another element of it that's really cool, is we have a great balance of comedic and dramatic actors who have very different styles. Comedic actors love ad-libbing, you know, all day, whereas a lot of dramatic actors, if you don't give them a note, they're not gonna do 20 takes of the same thing. Either give them a note, or let's move on, which then forces you as a director to really think through the motivation of the character in the moment. It seems like, and understand, acting and animation, the voice is half, the animating is the other half of it. So the animators then get that, and something I've said a lot that really excited me was that this film, the thing that we were most concerned about were people talking in rooms.
Yeah.
and that being boring, but the work that animators put into every micro expression and moment for us made those some of the most exciting scenes. Characters having a conversation, whether it be Miles and Gwen on the clock tower, or Miles and his parents in the counselor's office, or Gwen and her dad in the house. Those were as dynamic to create as an action sequence. And I think that was just the coming together of those great voice performances with animators.
I think it also has to be said though that one of the main reasons why the animation and the voices were so good and why those performances were so strong is from the beginning, when we started the process, like you asked, like we all wanted to make something that was gonna be visually like incredible and like was gonna be crazier than the first movie, but we also like held hands and we were really strongly committed to the idea, and so were our actors, that there had to be a strong emotional performance and a strong emotional like draw to every scene, or no one was gonna care. No one was gonna care. And I think what we were so concerned about, and whenever we were working with the actors or with the animators, was making sure that there was a very, very clear emotional drive that you understood in every scene, no matter how bombastic, no matter how much like crash, boom, bang there was going on, no matter how dazzling the visuals were, that you would be drawn into what these characters were feeling at all times. And I think that only came from, honestly, you and Phil like did a lot of it, working with the actors, and then when Bob and you were working with the animators, just trying to make sure that that was always on screen. And it took a lot of takes. It was very iterative. And then also I think sometimes when you saw the performance that the animators did, oftentimes went back and recorded new stuff.
Yeah.
Because the animators sometimes would up how emotional the performance was.
Yeah, we had to bring the actor up to match what the animators did. So it was kind of going, it was a bit of a conversation that I think was being had. And at the end of the day, understand, this is a film.
Yeah.
Like, I just, yes, it's animated, it's a cartoon, but we were treating this the same way we would be doing if it would be like a major drama with action in live action. It was, we wanted it to have that much of an emotional through line for all there's no small characters in this film.
Right.
A character who has 2 lines, believe me, there's probably a bio that I wrote for that character.
Right.
Because when we went out to get the actors, that was one of, and again, that's one of like my specialties, so it was fun to do. Before we approached a new actor, I write a bio.
Wow.
And often 90% of what's in that bio is not in the film.
Right.
So I wrote this long bio for Spider-Bite before we went to Amanda Stenberg. So like I'm writing bios for all these characters, one after the other, and in the writing of the bio, we're figuring out a lot of background, and that's all going to power that performance. So,
But the writing actually led, I mean, that's one thing that gave us such an opportunity for the performances and the animation that is kind of rare in animation, is oftentimes characters are one note. I'm happy about this, I'm sad about this. There's barely a scene in the film where a character is feeling just one thing at one time. Everyone has either a secret, or there's something that they don't know that everyone else does, or something like that, or they have a feeling that they don't feel like they can express to the other person. And that, with the like complex character designs, gave us such a rich opportunity for like subtlety that is rare in animation, where a little tilt of the head means something, or a little squeeze of the eyes, that kind of stuff. The setup that came from all that prep was like very rich for us.
There was one scene early on with Rio in the counselor's office when she's leaving. If you know, she sort of like roots around in her purse and then like looks at this like, I don't know, it's like a parking thing, or it's like a little moment like that. You don't really think about it as it goes by, but it lends to the humanity of the character. She's distracted by this thing, she puts it away, she turns around, and then the counselor sort of draws her back in. It's those little things that make this, I think, transcends animation and just becomes film.
and you have debates about this. A really tiny moment at the beginning when they go into Lenny's shop. And remember that Lenny goes, "Hey, what are you doing back there?" And he's slowly pulling out a baseball bat.
Right.
It's very subtle. We had a version where he pulls out the bat really big. And we had like this deep discussion about like, okay, this guy's probably been robbed before, like, you know, he's gonna go and inspect it, but just for safety's sake, we just wanna have, and we all would laugh like when we'd see the top of the bat just kind of float across the bottom of the screen, as opposed to him raising a bat. And again, it's just like, there's so much character in just a gesture. And that was a 20-minute discussion about different ways to have him reach for a bat for a character that's in one scene.
Yeah, that's so great. I wanna, before I turn it over to you guys for questions, I wanna, two other visual aspects I'd like to quickly address. Mike Lasker, the visual effects in general. I mean, you know, I've seen the first film. There's the whole multiverse effect, that crackle or whatever you want to call it. But there's so much more here, and there's so many other characters that relate to those effects. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that aspect?
Yeah, what was wild about the first film was we really had to rewire our brains as a visual effects company to sort of break all the principles that we had learned and done our whole careers. So every aspect of filmmaking, we had to sort of come up with a new way of doing it to make that comic style world, that Miles world. And on this one, it was that times 10. We had to bring paintings to life, worlds to life. And what you're talking about is the glitching, and how in the first film, we had a glitch effect that was pretty similar throughout the film. And in this one, we sort of brought it to another degree, kind of like everything else. So when you see him glitch inside every window, you'll see different render styles. We added line work to the glitching, because we had so much more line work in this film. And sometimes when there's a glitch, you'll see different versions of the character. So I think, you know, just like everything else in this film, it was like bigger and very sophisticated. The glitching sort of went along with that, sort of the breaking of reality.
Justin, you were quoted in the LA Times about.
I'm sorry.
About I think you mentioned about Cinderella's influence on Gwen's scenes, but in general, every multiverse, every world has its own art direction, its own look. Oh man, some of that stuff is just, you know, I drool. I'm drooling looking at Gwen's world in particular. Tell us about some of the thinking behind some of that.
Yeah. Well, the Cinderella comment, for those not fortunate enough to read my amazing interview in Los Angeles Times, it would basically, the Cinderella comment is, when I was young, when I was very young, you know, I saw, you know, must have been like 10 years old. I saw Cinderella, and I remember when her evil stepsisters are tearing apart her dress. If you watch that scene, then what happens in the scene is they're tearing apart her dress, and each little shred of her dress that comes off, the color of the background changes. It goes from like blue to yellow to orange to red, and then finally she falls to the ground and it almost turns black and white. And I remember as a kid feeling like, wow, with no words, I felt the intensity of the emotion of this moment, and it was actually, it gave me nightmares as a kid. Like, and I remember feeling like, why did something that was just color give me that feeling? And I think it's been like a dream of mine ever since to have the opportunity in a movie to have a character and have an opportunity where the story warranted it, where it didn't feel like it came out of left field. And here was this character, Gwen, Spider-Gwen's comics. If you've ever seen them, the covers have this very illustrative, sort of painterly, like watercolory sort of look to them. And I thought, here's this thing, guys. And we started talking early on. This is like I kept saying, we were all together. What if it's like a mood ring, you know, and like paint starts dripping, and like, what if when she's mad, you know, things turn red, and what if when she's sad, things are blue, and sometimes what if it's like subtext and she doesn't fit into the world, so she's blue even when the world is warm because she's sad and she can't feel the warmth of the world around her. And what if we just use the world like this expressive thing that could externalize all these internal things that are going on with her, so she wouldn't have to use as many words on screen. you know, she wouldn't have to talk as much, but we would know exactly what she's thinking and feeling. And then here came this like really cool opportunity. And I remember it was like really scary at first. Like we did this, like we do, when we're making a film, an animated film, we do these elaborate color scripts, like little paintings that sort of detail like thumbnails of like what the color and lighting is going to look like for each scene. And we did this like really abstract color script for when her dad pulls the gun on her, and like suddenly everything gets really abstract and painterly. The world starts falling apart around her. And everybody kind of like looked at these abstract paintings we had done, and we're like, this is what it's gonna look like. Everybody went, really? And I'm like, trust me, it's gonna be amazing. And thankfully, like Kemp said, we all had so much trust and faith in one another. Like, we took so much risk on the writing side, on the action and staging and camera side, but also on these visual things. And here was like, it was a dream come true to have the studio not get involved, not step in, where, I mean, I had like executives saying, really? It's gonna look like that?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah. And then we had amazing producers who would just take us aside and go, is it gonna be okay? And I would go, yeah, it's gonna be fine. And they go, okay, leave him alone, let him cook. And it was kind of like that. We were like getting all this permission to just try these things, because, and I'm not saying that nobody, including myself, it's not saying that we knew all the time what the answer was. We went through hundreds of iterations to get that scene to work. Like what you see on screen looks so effortless.
We actually lit the entire part of that sequence between Gwen and her dad at the end. Crazy experimentative, I mean, off the charts. And then we went back and honed it and kind of went back through it again, made sure it all played together, honed the colors, honed the effects. It was one of our earlier sequences in Gwen's World, so that really set the stage for everything we did later.
Yeah, and I think when we're developing these different looks, we, you know, and you can talk about this, of course, we often don't know, we don't have the tools at the beginning. They don't exist. Like, that's the thing that's really like, it's just headcanon. It's just this like thing where you're like, what if, imagine that the paint starts dripping off the walls and it transforms into something else, but it looks seamless and it's beautiful, and the whole time you shouldn't be aware that it's happening, and you should just feel it in the background. And they had to develop hundreds and hundreds of tools, and that process happened for every single one of those dimensions. And what he's talking about with like Gwen's World, it happened with Miguel's World, where we said, okay, what are the rules of this? And like, I don't know how many times you've all seen the film, if it's just once or if it's 10 times, but there's a different way to do depth of field in each dimension. There's a different, like in Miguel's World, like the further something is away from camera, because, you know, we said it would turn into a drawing. Like, as it gets farther away, it was like, okay, there's the illustration board that the artist is doing their illustration on. And at the base of the illustration board is like just canvas, right? It's just like the cold press illustration board. And then there's like blue pencil, and then there's a pencil sketch, and then there's pen and ink, and then there's marker, and then there's paint on top of that. And then you get to the top layer, and there's little details and highlights that they go in with gouache. They made a tool that can actually do that in real time as the camera pulls back from something. If you go watch, it's actually more amazing than you think it is. It's actually more incredible, and he's going to do a SIGGRAPH presentation soon, where you should probably go watch that to really understand how they did it. But
what's interesting about what you're saying is, it's not just that each world has its own visual style, it also has its own film style. Because we have to invent, like you said, depth of field, lens flares, what happens in depth, you know, how do you read the performance over top of these crazy colored backgrounds? So you have to light it in certain ways and layer things in certain ways, and every world had its own rules. So we had to build tools that were flexible enough to sort of try to make everyone's dreams come true and be as flexible that we could use them across worlds. So you have wet paint brushes in Gwen's world, you have dryer brushes in 2099 using similar tools, using the same line tool to be sketchy in India, but very clean in 2099. So it's just a lot of just trial and error, failing, succeeding, and a lot of really smart, artistic, technical people on this team.
And I do want to interject though. It all comes back to story, and I think I can point to these guys and they can pick up on this and talk more about it. But because I think none of it was. I never want people to watch this film and think that we all sat around and went, what would be cool? We didn't. It was actually like, okay, Miguel as a character, who is he? And how would you describe him as an emotional idea? And the idea of like, he's this guy who's like who's trying to present this perfect vision of what a Spider-Man is. He's bigger, he's buffer, he's slick, and yet under the surface is this like darkness to him and this brokenness to him that he can't ever repair. And that is reflected in the way we designed the world. And I think that's true for all the characters and all their dimensions. We talked about it from a story point first, and we built the rules for each world from a story point. And I think that's actually why, for me, as a filmmaker, this movie was amazing to make, is because we never just made choices for the sake of them. We only made them for story reasons.
Yeah. Look, I will say, last thing, we got to walk into a room. The day before, we looked at a painting, a still painting. The day after, we walked into that same room, said, okay, there's the painting again, and then Mike would hit play, and the scene would move. And the emotions that painting gave us became like 100-fold. So that is like magic. It's just
And that's what's so much fun, because we want to bring the paintings to life. Because on so many projects, you get concept art, and it's inspiration. And a lot of times, the final product doesn't really hit what that is. And when we did the first movie, and then this one, it's like you want to just bring it to life. And once you move that camera, you have to figure out how to make everything move, how to make it feel natural, how to make it feel alive. And it's just an amazing challenge. And so,
this movie in particular, the first one, and also, I mean, people like me look at this and go, you guys love it. You just see the love of animation in these movies. This is what animation can be, folks. You're telling audiences who don't know. I have to mention, before I take audience questions, the spot flashback animation line art. Who's responsible? No, I mean, really, how to tell us somebody about the thinking. Was there an animator who was mainly on that one, or was that, how was that done?
You talk about Spencer.
Well, so we had an amazing artist named Spencer Wan who took some first stabs at what it would look like to be inside Spot's head, experiencing things through his psyche. Right. A big point of inspiration was an amazing artist named Sergio Tobi, who does the most exquisite graphic novels.
Yeah.
And so we sort of gave that reference to Spencer and said, Spencer, he's going through something emotional. Yeah. He's dealing with trauma. He's dealing with, having not been accepted. He's dealing with rage and not knowing how to control it. And Spencer would come back with these amazing hand-drawn tests that were one idea just sort of gave way to the other. I think if we were to go straight ahead with a single person, he'd still be drawing the first scene right now. That's how intricate it was. But then I think all those materials were handed off to ImageWorks and amazing animators.
And the guys over at Tin.
And the guys over at Tin. Yeah, that's right.
There's a small animation production house here in Los Angeles that we brought on to take those tests and actually do all the finished work, because it's too much for one person. And they did an amazing job, actually.
That's fantastic. What a feast this film is. Questions? Red, right there. Yeah, you.
Okay, great. Thank you all for coming. My question is for Joaquim. I'm a big fan of your work on Avatar and The Legend of Korra. And I was excited when I saw that you were on this film because of your background in hand-drawn 2D animation and what you could bring to this CG film. How did that experience help you with both the action scenes as well as the more character acting focused scenes?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing, again, the first film sort of just gave everybody, whether you're a 2D artist, a 3D artist, just gave them permission to try and push and to infuse character into every beat. And I mean, from the most, dramatic, slow talking scene that there is in the film to, that big train sequence at the end, there's character woven throughout all of that. The thing that I wanted to try to bring was a sort of intensity to some of the action, and so the staging and a lot of I think the extreme posing on things that might have been pushing the boundaries a little harder than it was in the first film, and Miguel in this film was sort of the perfect vehicle for that. We did have a debate on how, I mean, you sort of became a bit of a template for how muscular it is to be in the world. But it was honestly a point of debate. People were worried that he was too imposing physically and that he was too muscular. I was like, no, that can lend to the intensity that he brings to all the sequences. So yeah, I mean, look, I grew upon all that experience, but really it was the first film that really gave the permission for us to try as hard as we wanted.
That note you were saying about Miguel and his muscles was definitely that's another great example of how early on the three of us we were getting pushback.
Yeah.
Spider-Man can't be this muscly, and he was so committed to it that it was because the three of us were willing to support him, it's everybody else backed off, and that is one of those great examples where, because we were so supportive of each other, and when you ask how does it work with three directors, when there's three of us, it's hard to tell us what to do.
Right. And I remember Justin going, just pretend like you didn't hear the note. Just going, huh? What?
I also kind of get philosophical about it. We're all huge fans of comic books, and there's always this thing that happens when you're reading a popular comic book and a new artist takes over, and the characters just look different.
Yeah.
And I was that was the philosophy. It was oh, well, it doesn't look like Miguel did at the end of the first movie. I'm well, it's three different dudes.
That's right.
And this is how we're drawing.
That's right.
And this is how we're gonna make them look. There's not gonna be a plot explanation of let's have a montage of him just working out. It's just, it's a new team, and this is a very subtle way for us, I think, to all put our imprint on our version of telling this story.
Yeah, if you look at Paul Smith's X-Men, and then you look at Jim Lee's X-Men, they're the same characters, they're drawn very differently.
Yeah, Wolverine's either 4'2" or 6'8".
That's right. Who do we have? Okay.
Just a quick question for the room. You guys all mentioned a little bit earlier that you started working on this in the middle of, or right when the first movie was coming out. I was curious, was there anything from the reception of that first movie that made you guys think twice about what you were doing here, or made you pivot, made you change?
I just wanted to quit. No, I just kidding.
I will say I had a moment where I kind of pooped my pants a little bit, because I came in and everybody, we could all tell it was going to be an amazing film. You feel it in the room. There was an energy. And then the film releases, and we're sort of just working up ideas for the sequel. And then the film starts doing sort of the business that it did. It starts getting these awards and recognized, and then it all leads up to an Oscar. And I remember feeling for a day, all the eyes sort of went well, best of luck to you. Good luck following that one up. But that quickly gave way. I think something that Kemp regularly brings up in interviews is sort of no, we're going to do something completely different. We're gonna make sure that's just going to give us permission to do what we want to do.
Yeah, I was excited by how well it did and following it up, just because, I don't know, I guess I'm just used to being underestimated my whole career. So as soon as they announced these three new directors, they were who are these losers? We want the original guys back.
Right.
And we just kind of looked at each other. Again, it helps our team, because we just kind of circle the wagons. And understand the first team doing their film didn't know how good it was gonna be until the last minute.
Right.
Like, it took till, I don't think they knew how good it was when they brought it to Pixar, let's put it that way. They looked like three guys who had like deers in the headlights.
Right.
And we were like, no, dude, that's really good. Like, they didn't even know. And I remember just like near the end, right before the film came out, sitting in the mix, with Phil and Chris. And I like looked over at Phil and I was like, dude, this is a good movie. And Phil was like, and you wouldn't say that if you didn't mean it. Like, we're hard on ourselves. Like, and none of us wanted to repeat anything they did in the first one. If it was like, take this one, but do more of it, I would have been like, nah, I'm good. I'd rather do something else. It was about, try to do something, don't try to repeat this. Where do you want to take the story? Let's just do something completely different.
Phil and Chris are obviously the hottest people in Hollywood with many deals, many studios.
people.
And my point is, clearly they're not on top of it. No. Yeah. On the one hand, how much were they involved? How much freedom did you guys have? It seems like you had a lot of freedom.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, they come in a lot late, like they make other films.
Yeah.
So, there was a period in the beginning, like for the first couple of years, where we just had like an occasional check-in with them.
Yeah.
And then they become more involved because, they're very hands-on producers. And I think that's part of why, I think the mystique of like Lord Miller Productions is that they have their own tastes and a very strong voice. And it's very helpful, as creators. I mean, ultimately, we're all kind of meant to be tastemakers. And they have like a certain irreverent sense of humor. There's always heart and humor in everything they do, but it's more like they come and go. And I think it's unique to like their style, and you see that in just about everything. I remember when Phil and Chris were gone for a while. It's like, where's Phil and Chris? It's like, oh, they're doing this Cocaine Bear movie.
Oh, yeah.
Like they were making other movies and gone. Like they were I think they did that in Ireland. And he would like text us pictures and be like, oh look, it's a guy in a bear suit. And then they would be back. So yeah.
Pretty wild. Okay, I know we have a lot more. Hold on. Okay, yes, you, ma'am.
Hi. What's everyone's favorite alternate iteration of Spider-Man?
So
There's
alternate not meaning Miles.
Right.
Okay.
Mine's a meme that wasn't allowed to be in the movie. Have you guys have seen Spoderin? It's a really bad drawing.
I do know.
And I asked if we could put him in, and he goes, I mean, I really enjoyed Scarlet Spider. I think he was a character that was like of a very specific generation, and we tried to capture like the exact sort of like a late 90s extreme, super muscly, angry version of him.
Yeah, for me it was Spider-Punk, and that's a character that was, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, probably technically the most challenging character.
I was gonna say Spider-Punk too, and when we were making the film, I don't think we realized that he was gonna steal every scene that he was in. But to have a character in a field of characters that had to stand out, and that he had to stand out the most, and still fit into the scene, and animate on different frame rates, and he was like different pieces of paper cut together every frame. I mean, such a complex character, but such an amazing character.
And Daniel really brought him to life. Like, for those who don't know, we do scratch before we hire the actors. So like Joaquin here was actually the voice of Miguel O'Hara for a long time. Justin did so many voices I lost count. I was like Jefferson. And Spider-Punk for a long time was being voiced by Daniel Pemberton, our composer, who if you've met Daniel Pemberton, he is not Spider-Punk. He just happens to be English. So even in storyboards, we're like, does this character work? Because it's like, I think it'll work once we get Kaluuya to voice it. So it's really funny.
And I would say if I'm going with the character, then it would be Spider-Punk. If I'm going for like who was I the most proud of in terms of getting to make him and bring him to the screen, it would actually be Spider-Man India, Pavitra Prabhakar, being able to bring an entirely new culture into the Spider-Verse and make that real, and how spectacular our character designers made that character. That really was like a footnote and kind of like not that amazing in the comics, but they elevated it so much, and the artwork of the environments was so elevated. But then on a personal level, it would be the little Peter Parks car. Because I remember, like, I saw that in the comic books when I was young, and I thought the idea that Spider-Man had a car.
I had the toy, man.
Yeah, like, I just thought it was like amazing, and the fact that we could get it into the movie was awesome.
That is awesome. I'm waiting for a Twinkie or something to show up next, and I can't think of anything else. Yeah, okay, hat.
Hi, my name's Miguel. I'm a sophomore film student at Loyola Marymount. First of all, I want to thank you guys for the Miguel representation.
Got it.
But speaking about representation, obviously in like recent years, in the past decade, there's been an incline of representation for a ton of communities and cultures in films, and Across the Spider-Verse and Into the Spider-Verse approaches representation in a very natural way. My question is very open-ended, but what does representation in this film mean to you guys? And how did you find it in this film and want to showcase certain cultures and communities and religions? That's the question.
What a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I don't want to overly simplify it, but it just represents the world outside my window. There's a thing that happens often when you're making films where there are invisible quotas that are being put on it. It's like, okay, well now there's this character, so there can't be any more of that character. One of the things that I didn't even notice till later on was that we never hit any quotas with anyone. We could make a character whatever we felt like making it, and no one ever, and in this business, people do step in and say, oh, well, a little bit too much of that means it's a black movie, or a little bit too much of that. We just, and all of us, I mean, we all live in Los Angeles and New York, like, it's just the world outside our window looks like the world of Spider-Verse. It wasn't even effortless, it wasn't an effort, it was just representing what we happened to see. It wasn't like we were choosing the characters that we were choosing because of their ethnicity. We were just choosing characters we thought were cool and that were a little bit different and that served the story. I think that, and if I can posit something, a theory, I think part of the reason why this film is connecting with so many people is because regardless of our backgrounds, there are certain universal truths to all of our lives. You know, what parent isn't worried about their kid? What kid doesn't undergo growing pains? There can be specificity to your culture, which I'm really into, making sure that if someone is from a different culture or different, that someone who looks like that character or is of that background sees it is accurate to that character. But that being said, I feel like the stories are all completely universal, and there's something that everyone can get. And you know, we live in a divisive world, so even that makes people angry sometimes. Like, damn it, it's so good, but like, it shouldn't be because it's too diverse. Like, you know, there's always going to be something like that. But no, I think you guys can add on to it. But it was always just representing the world outside our window. I mean, he's from Portugal and grew up here. Like, we have diverse families. Like, you see us, but our lives look like this audience.
I think too, this, you know, I don't know of any other superhero franchise that sort of, you know, the sort of hook of this is that anyone can wear the mask. That doesn't really happen with Batman. It doesn't happen with other characters. There's not a Superman-esque that Superman just goes around and like sticks on people's chests. That was the promise, is that your neighborhood, wherever it might be, has its own spider person that's protecting you.
Someone sent me an article today that said that this film was the biggest animated film of all time in India. And what excited me was that I think if that's the case, it's because he's not a token Indian character. You know what I mean? Like, it's easy to kind of be lazy and fall into tokenism, and everyone sees through that immediately. You do. It's just like, no token characters. I think that it's representative of the Indian writers' room that got together and poured their personal experience into POV and into the Mumbai sequence so that they could see the world that they recognized. And so that really felt good. You know what I mean? Because it connected to that audience because it felt authentic to that audience.
And then I just want to piggyback on that thought, since you are a young filmmaker, and I'm excited to see what you come up with in your future. The advice is as you bring this diversity in, bring in those diverse people to speak to it. Don't think you have to have the answers, and be humble and be open and actually listen to the voices that actually can educate and inform the characters that you're trying to create. Regardless of whatever it might be. First, like Kemp says, make the world that you want to see, that the world is around you, represent that world, but then bring in those people, let it inform the choices you're making. Listen and be open and be humble to it. And I think we did that the whole time, and I think that's what also shows up on this screen.
And it's not just race. I mean,
Yeah.
one of my favorite debates that we had, and this is a debate that happened over months, and I'm gonna share this with you guys, the counselor scene. For a long time, the joke was that Miles wanted to go to Columbia, and his mom said, that's too far. And they're in Brooklyn. I'm from New York. I was like, come on, it's just a couple of stops away, but it got a great laugh. And we workshopped, it was like, nah, if you're from New York, it'd be more like, I don't want my kid to go to Jersey. And so you see what I mean? It was a specificity to New Yorkers who were just kind of snobby about not leaving the city. And it's like that with everything, where it's just I sat in a theater in New York and watched it. And that line, everyone was like, oh, everyone's cracking up. And I'm sure everyone in Jersey was like, F you, and that's great. So you see what I mean? Because it's a real kind of thing that we've got in New York.
I'm from New York, my parents retired to Jersey, and my brothers and I had a tough time.
Yeah. So you see what I'm saying? It's both sides of that can totally enjoy it, and it's also real, and there's 1,000 little examples like that.
I hate to say it, but I think we may only have time for one more. I don't know about our I'll look over and see if we can.
There.
Maybe two. All right, maybe two. How about over here? One. You. We'll get another one after this.
My question was, why in the movie they got rid of Mayday's heterochromia?
Why they got rid of her heterochromia? The two different colored eyes?
Mayday's heterochromia. She has two different color eyes. I think she has two different color eyes the whole movie.
I thought she did.
No, she has both blue eyes instead of one brown.
She might have just found
Wow.
Can you comment to the next one and make sure that all the scenes are right?
Yeah. You should really come help us make the next one, because I might have slipped in a spot or two, and I believe you. Maybe that fell through the cracks, because we didn't mean to. That's the answer. So we made a mistake, and you caught us.
Good job. Good job. All right, one more question from our, all right, you, white shirt, yeah.
I've been piggybacking off of the discussion about authenticity and specificity. I feel like a big part of this for me, that kind of landed was kind of the soundtrack feeling very, very authentic, being somebody or something that Miles or a kid like Miles would listen to. And I think also kind of in film, you hear hip hop usually kind of soundtracking party moments or things like that, but in this film you have songs produced by Metro Boomin that are soundtracking really, really important moments. And so I guess my question for everybody is kind of how involved were you guys with the soundtrack and how that all came together?
Yeah, I mean, it was, it's, one of the great things is you gotta know what you don't know. I'm of a certain age, so that my hip hop is, sad to say, old school now. So I'm hearing Rakim and I'm like, isn't this great? And everyone's just like, no, whatever. Yeah.
This is in the 90s, we're done with that.
But Metro, as a producer, is more like my kids' generation, and it's you gotta really give him the freedom to and that's I remember we brought him in and I pitched him the movie and we showed him a scene. The scene we showed him was the barbecue. Yeah. Miles going into his room right before Gwen showed up. And at the time, I think we had a temp track there. The temp track.
It was a Lil Nas song.
It was a Lil Nas X song with it was a temp track, but it was just to kind of give him a vibe. And then we had this great conversation where we talked about like family. Family was something he talked about a lot with his younger siblings. And it was like, okay, this guy, like, he gets the emotion, he gets the story, he gets the character, and then he just kind of rolled with it. and you know, there's certain things bring, like, I'm a huge James Blake fan, and I knew Metro did a lot of James Blake, so I was like, yeah, it'd be great if you could, like, slide James Blake up in that, you know, just for your man, because I like some R&B. I love Blue Eyed Soul, but whatever. And so, you know, Metro just kind of rolled with it. And I think again, it's about trusting and like empowering your collaborators.
And there's really a handoff between like those moments, and they flow right into the score, and then there's a throwback, you know, to, I think that is really, really important for the film too, because you kind of get lost in it. You don't, most films, it is those clear moments where it's like the needle's dropped, all right, this is that moment. There's these like really elegant sort of passing the baton from one to the other.
It's the biggest challenge actually, is deciding song or score, because both Metro, you know, if you listen to the soundtrack, there's a lot of songs that aren't even in the film. You know, there was more music than we could fit in the film, and Pemberton did more score than we could put in the film, but it had to be whatever best served that scene. So there were versions of a lot of these scenes where we tried it with score, we tried it with the Metro song, and it always was like the best one ended up winning. Whatever's best for the film.
On behalf of A Seat for Hollywood, thank you all for being here today. Thank you very much for the Justin, Alan, and Mike for making this amazing film, and we continue in more ways than one. At the end of the movie and with your careers and Spider-Man.
Thanks, everybody.